All righty, Penn State football fans, you know what time it is. Blue-white breakdown, podcast time. PennLive's Penn State football podcast. Johnny McGonigal and Bob Flounders here. Taping this at lunchtime on a Tuesday. We are going to chop it up. Still plenty to get to as Penn State ended its spring with the fascinating blue-white game at Beaver Stadium on Saturday. High-scoring affair. We're going to talk about that. There's a lot more to talk about than just the score. But, Johnny, before I get to the score, I don't know how you feel about this, but the weather's driving me crazy. It's just driving me crazy. I just look like I have a ski cap on right now because I don't even think it's going to break, get into the high 40s in Harrisburg. It was kind of a weird weather day on Saturday, not great early, but it got better as the day went on. I looked at like the advanced forecast. It's going to be like 50 today, 60, I think, Wednesday, and I think it's going to be almost 90 in the Harrisburg area on Thursday. I think our bodies have had enough of this wild fluctuation. I hope you're doing well with the weather, but it's just been crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I put my jackets away last week, and I had to bring them back out today. In Pittsburgh, this morning the low was like 34 or 35 or something, something else like that. And then Thursday, it's going to go up to like 82, 83 degrees. So I guess that's April in Pittsburgh and in Pennsylvania in general. It can get weird. We know that in State College, the weather can certainly get weird, which was the case for the spring game, right? It was raining its tail off, maybe not like coming down crazy, but like consistent drizzle throughout the morning, throughout the early afternoon. And then once, first kick happened, it was just like, okay, like we're just going to open up the skies and it'll be fine. Like, sunny and all that. So at least fans got mostly decent weather for the actual festivities of the game, maybe not the pregame festivities that they really care about, but it was a fine game. Like we mentioned in our postgame video after at Beaver Stadium, like, 10-0 is 10-0. It's the offense isn't what it's going to be in the fall. A lot of missing pieces on both sides of the ball, but especially on offense. So, but a lot to still glean from spring, and not just the game, but the overall camp 15 practices and what we've been able to hear from James Franklin, his staff, and his players throughout the last month and a half.
Yeah, Johnny, and Penn State fans, we're not going to bury the lead on this podcast. We know there is a ton to get to on the recruiting front. Penn State struck gold again over the weekend, adding a couple of other really talented players for the future. Johnny, maybe we could just mention them real quick, but we're going to be back on another podcast, Blue-White Breakdown podcast, a bit later in the week to really focus in because as we talk about this, there's probably a pretty good chance that Penn State's not done on the recruiting trail, Johnny. But we're not going to bury the lead there. They had a great weekend. There was a lot of good players up there visiting, and a couple did commit. But there's still some things we wanted to get to regarding the blue and white game. There is actually there's a little bit of personnel news. But Johnny, we're gonna really take a deep dive into what James Franklin and his staff have been able to do on the recruiting trail. Not only in the month of April, but also, all really throughout the off season. But yeah, they're not done, and we just want to wait till kind of the dust settles to really kind of discuss in detail what they've been able to accomplish and how they're actually attacking geographically their recruiting future.
Yeah, I think we're going to record a podcast that's more recruiting focused later this week. But just to mention that the couple of recruits that they've gotten, a couple of commits, Caleb Brewer from Wyomissing, 2024 offensive lineman, a guy that has been recruited now over the last few months by Javen Williams, the 5-star from Wyomissing, who signed with Penn State's 2023 class. It's a good get by Phil Troutwine, the offensive line coach. Don't think he's going to be done this week, so we'll stay tuned on that. But then Keandre Barker as well, 2025 4-star running back from a Texas high school. I believe he's actually an Arkansas native, had SEC schools all after him. And, 10 days or whatever it was after Quentin Martin, one of the top running backs in the 2024 class, commits to Penn State. Keandre Barker, one of the top running backs in the 2025 class, also commits to Penn State. So they've been on a little run here. I say little, they've gotten 4 or 5, maybe 6 guys now in the month of April, starting to lose count at this point, Bob. And again, they're going to add to that total. We expect in the coming days, weeks and so. So a lot more to come on the next podcast with recruiting. But James Franklin and his program's in a pretty good spot right now, not just in the future, but in the present with the type of talent that they have and the type of talent that they just signed that is already making an impact on the program.
Yeah, that's a nice little tease for the Penn State fans. We are definitely circling back to recruiting. I think there's going to be a little bit more to talk about a little bit later in the week. So we're looking forward to chopping that up. Johnny, before we get into our thoughts moving forward after watching the blue-white game, not only just watching the blue-white game, but listening to the way that James Franklin, his assistants, and the players just talked throughout spring. There's a lot to get to there, but a couple of just housekeeping notes. I saw Kevon Lee on Twitter. I believe he had a visit to Mississippi State, Starkville, I believe was where I saw him down there. And he's a guy that can play. I just remember. I know he's going to play somewhere. I'm not quite sure where it is, but I saw he was maybe visiting, I believe, Mississippi State. One other thing I wanted to run by the Penn State fans. Little did we know that Penn State was actually, I think they were showcasing Jimmy Crist at the blue-white game. He was one of a handful of players. The quarterbacks, it was Tank Smith, and I think Jimmy played for both the blue and the white. And right after the game, he's in the transfer portal, so wish him well. I don't know how big of a hit that really is for Penn State's depth. I don't doubt that Jimmy Crist can play somewhere, but the way that Penn State has kind of stockpiled talent along the offensive line, there really was no room at the end, I think, for him unless there were a lot of injuries. So wish him well, but it would appear that he is headed elsewhere.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if a player or two more follow, Chris's footsteps into the portal. A scholarship player or two that's not going to really play, that could seek more playing time elsewhere, whether that's still at the Power 5 level, at the Group of 5 level, or even down to the FCS potentially. You look at the guys who Penn State have lost since the end of the 2022 season to the portal.
Yeah.
Not many like high level contributors at all. I mean, Kevon Lee is one you mentioned, would be probably the highest contributor that they lost. But again, the reason why he left is because you've got Nick Singleton, you've got Katron Allen. They signed two guys in the 2023 class at running back, and then recently brought in or got a commitment from Minnesota running back Trey Potts, Williams native, and so they're set at running back. The other high profile name was Christian Veilleux, but you've got Aller, you've got Perbula, and Smolik signed in this class. So I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of other guys end up leaving. With the portal now open on the 15th, on the day of the blue-white game, it opened, and I believe it just opened until the end of the month. So it's not like a long winter period like there was before. It's a couple weeks. Basically, guys have those conversations with their head coach and their assistant coaches, get a feel for where they're at, not only in the program, but specifically within their position room, how much playing time they can expect, how much of a real opportunity they can expect once training camp comes around. And, James Franklin always calls those the tough, the honest conversations that have to be had. And for guys lower on the depth chart, to just get that clarity and then make a decision. We'll find out more if there's more movement over the coming days. Wouldn't be surprised if there's more attrition, and really wouldn't be surprised either if Penn State, they already are a little active right now, but if they're active in the portal, because James Franklin mentioned after the blue-white game, it's a need. It's a spot that we knew was a need is defensive tackle depth. They're going to be looking for that in the portal. He also mentioned wide receiver because he said there isn't enough competition right now. I don't know if he was just alluding to bringing in Dante Cephas from Penn State because he has not become official yet and hasn't been able to become official yet. Those are a couple spots where I wouldn't be surprised if they brought some depth in. And they also just sent out an offer to, I believe his name is Emmanuel Pregnon. He's a guard from Wyoming, which a lot of Power 5 schools have already offered. So Penn State has also offered him as well in the last couple of days. So always some little, tidbits and nuggets on the portal recruiting trail, Bob, and I would expect some more over the coming days and weeks.
Yep. Blue-white breakdown. We're talking about Penn State recently wrapped up its spring sessions with the blue-white game at Beaver Stadium last Saturday. 10-0 Blue win. All the damage done on the scoreboard was early. Really, I was really fascinated, more so on the defensive side than on the offensive side, by some of the pleasantly surprised by just how deep this team looks like it's going to be. But I wanted to comment on kind of something you brought up, because I'm going to be writing a little bit about it. I don't know how many coaches are really forthcoming about this, but James has always done this at Penn State. Right after blue-white, he goes out of his way. And these are real. I mean, and I believe him when he said these are tough love talks. He meets with all of the players are going to meet with their position coaches. If they haven't already, it's Tuesday, like noon. And then James said after the blue-white game in his post-game presser that he will meet with every player on the roster, scholarship, no scholarship. And that he said he was going to do it Monday and today, Tuesday, and hopefully have it wrapped up by the end of day Tuesday. I mean, that's a lot of meetings. So I don't know. I'm trying to imagine having that many meetings and being able to, do that in such a short period of time.
I'm just like a line out of his door, like he's just waiting.
I'm sure that some meetings are shorter than others, but yeah. My sense is that James is very much. It's a two-way street. He wants to hear from the players. He wants to hear what they think about their position coaches. He wants to hear about how they think they did in the spring and about where they see themselves. But James is also going to really tell them where they are right at the conclusion of spring drills and kind of what they need to do and how realistic it is for them to make a move this year if they want to make a move. And right after that, not every player, right, is going to hear what they want to hear. And I think that I'm sure it goes on everywhere else, but the thought of having that many personnel meetings, that has to be quite an undertaking, and very curious about that. A couple of years ago, I had the sense that when he did this, I think after the 2019 blue-white game going into the 2019 season, I don't have a funny feeling. I have a feeling Tommy Stevens did not like what he heard, because Tommy was not able to really work that spring, and everyone thought he was going to be Trace's successor. Sean Clifford got almost all the work in spring drills, made a huge jump forward. And I think James told him, look, the job is promised to no one. You're going to have it's going to be a competition in August. And I think shortly after that, he went to Mississippi State. But I think those are the type of meetings that I think fans should know about. I think there's a lot of players that are not all of the meetings are going to go the way the players want them to. And I would love to be a fly on the wall on some of these, because Penn State's so deep, Johnny, that it must be really tough to be that open, and also mindful of the fact that you might like a player and you don't want them to go into the transfer portal. So how honest is James Franklin prepared to be?
Yeah, I mean, look, Nick Singleton's meeting is probably like 30 seconds long. It's like, hey, Nick, let's just watch that Rose Bowl run real quick. I think you're doing a pretty good job. I think you're all good. Meanwhile, like the sixth string, guard or tackle, defensive lineman. I don't even think they have six deep at linebacker, but it's though for those guys, it's probably tough. And I still go back to something that James said earlier this spring, that he mentioned that there are veterans and older guys who were, either taking it light during spring or had injuries that had, kept them out of spring ball. That he mentioned after the blue-white game, that anyone who missed the blue-white game will be good going forward. Like, it's nothing to be like no season enders or anything like that. But he mentioned earlier in the spring that, with these guys who are sitting out right now, it's opportunity for younger guys to finally get the reps that they really want and that they've really maybe asked for. And if they don't prove themselves now, those reps might not be there in the fall. Basically, he's saying, like, don't come complaining to me when you didn't make a move up the depth charter within your position room when you had the reps in spring, because that's what spring camp is mostly for. It's for development and other things, but for guys who are not Nick Singleton to make a move. And so we'll see if there's maybe a guy or two who enters the portal who falls in that camp. You look at positions across the board, there's a handful, maybe a defensive end here, maybe a tight end there. We'll see. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the roster ends up shaping up, because we know that this isn't the final roster going. Like there are a few spots over the limit, I believe, right now. So there's going to have to be some attrition. And it's also going to be interesting to see kind of how these guys who end up, what the roster ends up being throughout the summer, how they develop and how they end up attacking and getting into training camp. Because we've seen some younger guys impress during spring ball. Tony Rojas, KJ Winston, to name a couple. Dennis Sutton has really developed well. And I mean, probably the most physically imposing defensive end that Penn State has. And that's saying something with Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac. A lot of young guys who have been stepping up throughout the spring camp, and it's going to be up to them now to take what they hear from their position coaches and build on it in the summer.
Yeah, let's take it one step further. I'm gonna bring up 3 positions to you where I think that they're either like incredibly deep at those positions, or they should be deep at the positions, but there might be some tough conversations. So to me, as you were talking about, what are the conversations like at some positions where if James is going to be honest with players, they might not hear what they want to hear. So 3 of them, obviously wide receiver is one, right? Because James has set the pecking order. We know who 1 and 2 are, and we're just kind of guessing how the chips are going to fall from like 3 through 8 or 9. And there's just no chance, Johnny, that some of these receivers are going to be happy, I think, with what they have to hear either from Marcus Hagans or Mike Yursich or James Franklin, because a lot of these kids were pretty coveted players. And it was great to see Omari Evans step up. And Caden Saunders, I thought, did some good things in the blue-white game. But there are some other receivers that, may be a little bit older in that room that I would imagine those conversations might be a little more difficult. 2 other positions, I don't think it's going to be quite the case, but they're just so deep that I wonder how James and the coaches are going to handle it. Corner would be one, right? Because on the one hand, they want to play 4 or 5 corners in every game, so maybe it's a little different there, and they're going to factor in special teams. But I mean, I'm sure Penn State probably they feel like they have 5, 6, maybe 7 players who could probably play if they had to, and at the very top of the roster, their top 4 or 5 are really good. And safety's the other. They're replacing Jair Brown. And, Jalen Reed did not play in the game, but James talked about it. He said, if you look at the setup of the safeties, we felt like the 2 starting safeties we had on the blue team were really good, but we also really, really liked the 2 safeties on the white team. So that's 5 guys right there. You factor in somebody like Elliott Washington, who they like, and who's coming in August. Johnny, I just think it's a really fascinating roster management game they have to play at those 3 positions, but wide receiver more than any other position. If you're looking for somebody to probably come out of a meeting not happy, it might be at the wideout room.
Yeah, just because there's so many guys, and especially that Dante Cephas is coming in. I ended up on the website put together like a projected offensive depth chart coming out of spring ball, and I'll be doing the same depending on when you're listening to this. It might already be out because it'll be coming out Wednesday. Will be the defensive depth chart projections. But just looking at it, wide receiver was one where I'm like, holy cow, there's just a lot of dudes in this room that we've talked about. Keandre Lambert-Smith and Harrison Wallace have separated themselves throughout spring ball, and I put Dante Cephas there as a starter as well, just given his pedigree, production, how heavily coveted he was coming out of the portal. Amari Evans, Caden Saunders, and Malik McLean feel like they're in that next tier. Omari, after a nice blue-white game and had repped with the first team for the last week or so of spring ball. Caden Saunders, we talked about his talent before. He also has a really good relationship with Drew Aller. Your heir apparent quarterback, and Malik McLean has the raw talent and the frame that you would want, coming out of Florida State. But then you look at, Malik Mega, who when we talked to him this spring, said that he feels like he's going to have a big year, but is he going to feel like he's too far down the pecking order? Liam Clifford, Christian Driver, Tyler Johnson, Anthony Ivey,
right,
are all guys that, if you told me that they entered the portal, I would not be surprised.
Yeah.
I mentioned tight end, and I consider probably Mega Barnwell going forward, the 2023 signee, as more of an offensive line prospect, given his frame and everything. But if you include him at tight end, which is where he's playing right now, they've got 7 scholarship tight ends. That feels like a lot. And you've got Khalil Dinkins, who kind of emerged as the third tight end this spring with Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren taking it easy. So, if you're Jerry Cross, are you like, hey, do I want to be the 4th tight end in this room? Do I want to test my luck somewhere else? Safety is another spot where you've got your 4 top guys pretty locked in with Keaton Ellis, Saki Wheatley, Jalen Reed, and KJ Winston, the way he's performed over spring ball. If you're someone who is, a sophomore in that room, second, third year player, and you've got not only those 4 guys ahead of you, but some freshmen coming in the 23 class, you might want to look elsewhere. So these are just the conversations and the thoughts that are going to be going on, not only in the heads of the players, but the coaches. When an Anthony Poindexter meets with a player like that, when, Marcus Higgins meets with a player like that, and they just they have to be honest. They have to keep it real, but they also want to make sure that they don't lose too many guys, because regardless of how much they've maybe produced for you in the past, you can always say like, hey, we still need depth. It's not like, hey, we can lose 4 wide receivers this portal window. Like, they can't do that. And I wouldn't expect that. Just a handful of guys that probably won't factor in this year and maybe not next year. Guys who will, see the writing on the wall.
Yeah. Malik Mega, I think that is a player that jumped out to me because
he can play elsewhere.
Penn State does have a role for him as a gunner on special teams, and I think they really want him to stick it out. But if he wants to be a wideout, with what Penn State has on the roster now, and with the transfer portal always kind of an option to collect talent. I mean, they were able to do it with Mitchell Tinsley. Dante Cephas, I think, is a guy that once he gets on campus, he gets comfortable. I think his talent is going to be apparent very quickly. So if you're Malik Mega, I think, you're at the point in your life where it's time for you to take a hard look at what you want to do. What do you want to be? If you want to be a receiver and play, FBS football, I don't know. Maybe the opportunity will, but I think something's going to need to happen in front of him. Liam Clifford's another guy I agree with. The safety that jumped out to me is Mekhi Flowers, who is only a second-year safety. I actually thought he played pretty well in the blue-white game, took advantage of the fact that Jalen Reed wasn't in there. He looked really comfortable. He's actually added some good weight. He made some nice plays on the ball. I don't think he's far off from earning playing time, but that's a tough hill to climb at safety for this year when you look at who is in front of him. If Jalen Reed is healthy and as good as Winston looks, man, holy mackerel. And then you got Keaton Ellis and you got Zaki. It's just, he's going to play. I don't know how much he will play, but he's probably looking at an injury to get him in the defensive rotation. But he still might be a really, really good player at some point this year. So those are some of the guys I think. Curious to see what happens in the wideout room. Curious to see what happens in the safety room, Johnny. But let's just talk. Is there anything else that was on your radar, maybe that we didn't talk about on our post-game video on Saturday, as far as whether you were impressed or concerned about a position or a player? Anything you didn't really, because we only talked for about 3 or 4 minutes. Anything we really didn't get to on your end?
Yeah, I think it actually dovetails nicely with another player that we didn't mention who could be a portal guy. The strength at defensive end was apparent at the blue-white game. I mean, we watched Deni Dennis Sutton. Time after time, we would just look at each other in the press box, be like, oh, like he just bulldozed Drew Shelton or bulldozed Caden Wallace. Like those guys were having a real time of it trying to stay in front of him and prevent him from making Bo Perbula's life a living hell, because he was running around quite a bit. So when you have a guy like Deni and obviously Chop Robinson and Disa Isaac and Amin Vanover, I think is one of the more underrated players on the roster.
Sure.
4.5 tackles for loss last year, 3 pass breakups, played over 250 snaps for them. Their top 4 at the end is so firmly set. And then you've got Zariah Fisher, who I think flashed in the blue-white game as well. He thought that, everyone thought that he was going to be out for the entirety of the 2022 season with that knee injury he suffered this time last year. He actually came back and played in a couple games. And so if you look at those as the top 5 DNs, then you look at a guy like Smith Vilbert, who Only played in one game last year, missed the regular season due to unspecified reasons. And then, I don't believe he played in the blue-white game. So is he a guy who decides to look elsewhere because he's not going to crack that top 4? I think it's pretty firmly set. And then with Zariah Fisher, if he continues to make a splash play here and there, he could be used as the 5th guy in that rotation. And when you have a Chop, a Disa, and Deny especially, I mean, you're not going to, they'll rotate, they always rotate on the defensive line, but you're not going to have many situations where none of those 3 players are on the field unless you're up by 30 against Rutgers or 40 or whatever. So yeah, I think D end is another spot where there's a player or 2 there, maybe even defensive tackle, because they'll be bringing guys in or a player in at D tackle. So just keep an eye on that defensive line.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned D tackle. I think Devon Townley is the guy that was a defensive end. I think briefly left the team, came back, bulked up. And to hear James Franklin still talking about them being short at defensive tackle, I don't know if Devon played on Saturday. I'm not sure that he did. I was just watching some other things, but I did. If he did play, I did not see anything coming from him. And I know it's a new position, but he's not. I think he's from Minnesota, so I just don't know maybe what the future would hold for him, because I do think that James is going to try. If a defensive tackle they like nationally becomes available, if they can get somebody in that's a little bit bulkier. I think I saw somewhere that one of Katron Allen's teammates, I don't know if he's a Georgia Bulldog or something like that from IMG, is in the portal. That guy looked like he was pretty big, and I'm just speculating. I think James is gonna, and his staff have probably made defensive tackle a priority. They know they need a guy. They need one more guy I think they can trust to play inside, especially when they're going to face some good running games.
Yeah, defensive tackle's a need. It has been a need. PJ Mustipher gone, your primary one technique, your plug-and-play veteran. Hakeem Beamon started 12 games for him last year, but he's he doesn't have the size. He's more of a, get to the passer, disrupt the backfield kind of player. Izzard feels like the guy who would line up next to him as the starter, if not Devon Ellies, but both of them are around 290, 300. And I know that PJ was around 320. So you want a little bit more size. I love what Zane Durant will bring to the table. I feel like his ceiling is probably the highest of that group. And he's added some weight, this throughout the winter and into the spring to handle the run game more. I believe he's up to 280, 282. But that's still a little less than what you would want for, that's not the position that he would play. He would not just fill in seamlessly for PJ Mustipher. Right. So they'll be after a defensive tackle or 2, and that could have a domino effect in that room, whether it's Devon Townley, who, has already entered the portal before. He ended up coming back. He was a D end, and he came back, I think, on the promise of hey, we'll move you to D tackle so you get more of a look at playing time. And I don't think that's necessarily worked out. But yeah, they also have Jordan Vandenberg, Caleb Artis as well. And you got a signee or 2 coming in from 2023. So we'll see how that position room works out. But I feel like we covered it, Bob. I feel like we, again, we'll talk more recruiting in the next podcast that we do, but coming out of spring, some of the questions that we had, like the wide receiver, there's more clarity there, I think, with Keandre and Harrison playing well enough that James is willing to tell us that, hey, they separated themselves. But there's still that's still going to be a question going into the West Virginia game. D tackle is going to be a question going into the season opener. So yeah, but we also know that from the positives from the blue-white game, that defense isn't going to be nasty. It's going to be it's so deep. It's so talented.
Yes.
It's crazy that you lose a Joey Porter Jr. and a Jair Brown, and your defense is still going to contend to be the top defense in the conference, one of the top defenses in the country. So, Manny Diaz, as we've said before on this podcast about the spring, he's got plenty to cook with.
Yeah, and I really think you got to really give a lot of credit to Anthony Poindexter, and Terry Smith for the work that they're doing with these kids, and just the staff for recruiting these guys. They are just reloading now back there, and it's been quite a transformation on the back end. You think about where defensive back was at Penn State when James Franklin arrived. Not really. I did not consider it an impact position, before James got here, and he started playing freshmen right away. Whether it was Grant Haley, John Reed, all those guys played early. Now they're getting bigger and faster versions of Grant Haley and John Reed, and they're playing them right away. And to your point, this defense is not going to be a defense that I think a lot of Penn State fans have seen in State College since James Franklin arrived. And their fifth and sixth players at some positions are going to be pretty good, and they would be playing and starting elsewhere in the Big Ten. One more thing just before we go, because like you said, we're going to talk a lot about recruiting a little bit later in the week. I just want to say this. I've been covering Penn State since the 2002 season. This is like, I would make this my 21st or 22nd year. But I don't remember seeing a freshman storyline develop quite like Tony Rojas did this offseason at Penn State. When you consider, I know he was a coveted recruit, Johnny, but when you consider where he was size-wise in early January, and I remember first looking at his weight, and I think it was below 200 pounds. It was where they originally listed him. I'm like, I don't care how good this guy is. There is not a chance on earth. He's we'll see you in 2024 because you're just not ready. And then when James Franklin revealed halfway through spring that he gained about 30 pounds, I'm like, I don't know about that. And then I know you did a story on him, and you talked, I think, to his coach, and he's like, yeah, he's a little different than when he played high school. And then to watch him play in the blue-white game, and I know that they like their linebacker group other than him, but man, he's come so far so fast, and that is something it's hard to see. You rarely see it. And I just think that, Manny Diaz is going to find a way to have a role for this guy, because he was everywhere. And I mean everywhere in that game. It didn't matter who was trying to block him. It didn't matter what running back. It could have been, Katron Allen, whoever came his way, he put them down. And if he's going to gain a little bit more weight by the time he gets to August, we could be looking at the linebacker picture maybe a little bit differently. I just could not believe how far he came in such a short time. And if there's one player I'm really looking forward to see as far as progress being made going into August, I would say it's him.
Yeah, I mean, give a little sneak peek of that defensive depth chart, projection that I'm putting together. Like if you haven't already read it, or depending on when you're reading it, because I haven't fully finished it yet, but I've got Tony Rojas in the 2 deep. I've got him right behind Abdul Carter, because I feel like, to spell him, or whenever Abdul will come off the field, I feel like Tony kind of fits right in to that kind of player, that kind of mold. I mean, he shoots out of a cannon. The way he gets off blocks, the way he gets after guys, side to side, lateral, sideline to sideline speed is just, he's kept it, right? Which is the big thing. Like, he put on all that weight and he kept it. And so, yeah, you have Abdul Carter and Curtis Jacobs as your outside linebackers, which, find me a better duo in the Big Ten at outside linebacker than those two. Kobe King, I think, has the makings of a starting middle linebacker and played a lot for them last year. Him and Tyler Elston, who's been dealing with an injury during spring ball. But, I mean, beyond that, like Dom DeLuca, you've got, Keon Wiley, I think Tony Rojas is going to play some serious snaps for them. And I think, too, that, between Tony Rojas and KJ Winston and these young guys who we saw step up and play so well in the blue-white game, and then combined with the guys that you already knew were going to play well, the Abdul Carters and Chop and Adisa and all that, like, I just think it further reinforces that this defense is so good, and the offense having to go against that without Olu Fashanu and without Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren, there's only so much you can draw if you're looking at Drew Aller and Bo Perbula, specifically Drew. Now, look, there were a couple throws that I think, going back on it, Drew missed, but at the same time, it's April. It's April. You've got two quarterbacks who, while Drew played some meaningful snaps last year, it's not like he started 10 games. He played in 10 games, but a couple of them, he only threw a couple passes. There's going to be growing pains with these guys. So I've seen, just like on social media, a little bit of, overreaction from the blue-white game, which, Bob, that's, stunning for overreaction for a spring game. But, look, it's one of those where it's a spring game. It's April. These guys, they're running vanilla offense. There's so much time for them to get better. And when they have and I mentioned guys that were missing, like Dante Cephas was reportedly visiting. So he was on the sidelines or wherever he was, but he was in Beaver Stadium. He wasn't on the field. I just think this offense is not close to the finished product. And anyone who is freaking out over it, like, hey, this is what we're going to have in the fall, like, it's going to get better. Trust me.
Yeah. And I'm not so as good as, look, Omari Evans had a good game for the blue team, and they needed to see that. But when you look at the score and see it was blue 10, white 0, blue had the established players, what's going on with this offense? Hey, look, I would make the argument that maybe the 3 best players on the field on Saturday were on the white team and on the white team defense. Dennis Sutton, Rojas, and Winston all played for the white team. And it was not going to be an easy day. When you're two potential, I mean, Olu didn't play, but they're 2 of their best 3 tackles couldn't do anything with Deny. They had to double team him, and even the double teams weren't going well. No one could track Tony Rojas. He was getting to the ball before anyone else. And Winston, you can't tell me he couldn't start for, I don't know, there's 14 teams in the Big Ten. You can't tell me he wouldn't be a starter on at least 10 defenses. And that's kind of why it was 10-0. So I'm with you, Johnny. It was like trying to play offensive football with one hand tied behind your back when you considered how little they used their best running backs. They didn't really have any tight ends. I mean, it was a scale. And then the white team probably had the 3 best players on the field, in my opinion. I mean, it could have easily been a scoreless. I mean, I think Omari got away with a little push-off on Storm Duck, or it might have been a scoreless draw. But, I mean, I would take that as a good sign. That's how good the defense is going to be in the fall.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, when you have Nick Singleton and Katron Allen combining for 10 carries, like, they're not going to combine for 10 carries against West Virginia guys, and again, this is speaking to like a very, like a minority, I think, of the fan base, because most people understand that a spring game is a spring game, and, you got to take everything with a grain of salt. But anyone who is hitting the panic button on April 18th, I don't know what to tell you, because it's a spring game and these things do matter. KJ Winston coming out and playing well matters, and Tony Rojas playing well matters, but it's only to a degree. You got to take everything with context and with a bigger picture and perspective. And I think that's what we'll do, Bob, as we navigate the rest of our actual spring. Hopefully the weather, I see the sun coming out in Pittsburgh. This is lovely. And then navigate the summer. And you know what? It's going to be like Big Ten Media Days before you know it. It's going to be training camp before you know it. And we're going to be here talking about the wide receiver and defensive tackle question marks again at that point, because we just will be.
Yeah, until Dante Cephas goes 90 yards in a scrimmage, James Franklin can't hide his enthusiasm.
Yeah,
we're going to be talking about it. But hey, listen, Penn State fans, that's it for this episode of the Blue White Breakdown. But you definitely want to check back for Johnny and I talking about the recruiting trail and all the success Penn State's had, not only over the weekend, but really the last couple of weeks. And they're not done. They are not done. They're already attacking the 2025 class. So we're gonna focus on that a little bit later in the week. But you guys hang in there. Hopefully the weather is warm wherever you are. But I can tell you it's not warm in Harrisburg. And then in 2 days, it's going to be 107. So I might just have to check into the hospital this weekend. But that's me. Hopefully it's warm where you guys are.